After 24 years in higher education, getting his undergraduate and PhDs at Columbia and serving as faculty at Yale, William Deresiewicz made an observation about today's modern Ivy League college students. Quote, "The system of higher education manufactures students who are smart and talented and driven, yes, but also anxious, timid, and lost, with little intellectual curiosity and a stunted sense of purpose, trapped in a bubble of privilege, heading meekly in the same direction, great at what they are doing, but with no idea why they're doing it." Close quotes. Dr. William Deresiewicz, on his classic book, Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life Now. My name is Tod Worner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. William Deresiewicz is an author, essayist, critic, and speaker. His books include the New York Times bestseller Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life, and most recently, The End of Solitude, Selected Essays on Culture and Society. His current project is a historically situated memoir about being Jewish in modernity. Bill has published more than 300 essays and reviews and spoken at nearly 200 colleges, high schools, and other venues. He has won the Hyatt Prize in the Humanities, the National Book Critics Circle's Nona Balakian Citation for Excellence in Reviewing, and a Sidney Award for the long-form essay. He's also a 3-time National Magazine Award nominee. His work, which has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Harper's, and many other publications, has been supported by grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Guggenheim Foundation. Translated into 19 languages and anthologized in Best American Essays, Best American Non-Required Reading, and more than 40 college readers. Bill received, as I said, a PhD in English from Columbia and taught at Yale before becoming a full-time writer. Bill, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Segment 1, Excellent Sheep. In his book, Excellent Sheep, William Deresiewicz writes, quote, "I was teaching a class at Yale on the literature of friendship. One day we got around talking about the importance of being alone. The ability to engage in introspection, I suggested, is the essential precondition for living the life of the mind. And the essential precondition for introspection is solitude. My students took this in for a second. Introspection, solitude, the life of the mind, things they probably had not been asked to think about before. Then one of them said with a dawning sense of self-awareness, 'So you're saying that we're all just like really excellent sheep?' Close quote." Bill, let's start off with, how did you answer that? And what exactly was the student saying when he meant, what did he mean when he said excellent sheep?
Um, you know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that she knew. I think it was, like I said, this kind of phrase that just came kind of tumbling out of her mouth.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really immediately germane to what we were talking about. So I don't know that I had much of a response, but because it startled me too. But I never forgot it. I mean, it's a quite a memorable phrase, and I think that I thought about it a lot, and I mean, I thought about it a lot, but it also did help. I mean, she wasn't wrong that I had been already thinking along those lines. It crystallized a lot of what I had been seeing among my students at Yale. I had already been there a few years. And I mean, I used it as the title of the book, not just because it's a great phrase, but because I think it encapsulates in 2 words, the diagnosis.
Yeah. Bill, in Excellent Sheep, you write, quote, "Whatever bar you place in front of them, these students will clear. A friend who teaches at a top university once asked her class to memorize 30 lines of the 18th century poet Alexander Pope. Every single kid got every line correct, down to the punctuation marks. Seeing them write out the exercise in class," she said, "was a thing of wonder, like watching thoroughbreds circle a track." The problem, you go on, is that students have been taught that this is all that education is. Doing your homework, getting the answers, acing the test. Nothing in their training has endowed them with the sense that something larger is at stake. They've learned to be a student, not to use their minds. And finally, you say, very passionate about ideas. Very few were passionate about ideas. Very few saw college as a part of a larger project of intellectual discovery and development. one that they directed by themselves and for themselves, close quote. Bill, in any one of these students' lives, I mean, this is an unbelievable diagnosis to be making, because I think those of us who have kids that are in their later years of their primary schools, getting into high school, and then the college game, you're speaking kind of uncomfortable truths about this system and the process. In any one of these students' lives, where did the problem begin? And when did they become such formidable monsters of efficiency, at times devoid of the passion for learning?
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy question to answer because I think all of this comes from the college admissions process. I mean,
Mm,
that may sound simplistic, but I mean, I think any parent, any kid who is or has been involved in the college admissions process as it exists today understands what this beast is, and
mm,
also, I mean, if you, I'm sort of imagining an hourglass in my mind. It is the middle of the hourglass. It is that choke point,
yeah.
and before it is childhood and adolescence, and after it is the world of professional achievement. Not that there aren't
Mm,
hurdles afterwards, but this is the crucial one. Or at least, I mean, this is part of the problem. Uh, Aspirational families think that it's and kids think that it's the choke point. What I'm saying is like, no,
yeah.
actually, your life isn't over if you didn't get into one of these 12 schools and you can do wonderful things and great things. But this is how it's treated, um, for reasons that we can go into. And parents in high schools and even middle schools are very aware of what the selective college, the elite college admissions process demands. And it has
Hmm.
come to structure everything that kids do at an earlier and earlier age. I mean, I graduated from high school in 81, and it was only in retrospect working on this book that I realized like I had gone through this system too, but it was in its
Sure.
early stages. And maybe, kids who ended up in the Ivy League did 3 AP courses and 3 extracurriculars. So you didn't
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
start to think, which also meant that you didn't really start to think about this until, I don't know, 10th, 11th grade. But as I said, it's sort of as the competition gets fiercer and fiercer, and you know that, oh my God, when my kid is a senior in high school, I want them to be like in advanced calculus. So you have to reverse engineer. You work backwards all the way to middle school, maybe
Yeah.
even fifth grade, maybe even earlier. Uh, and this becomes, and because it is an arms race between families and students, which some years ago became international, um,
Mm,
there's no room. Like if you're not working on it at this moment, you're falling behind, right? There's no
yeah.
excuse
Yeah.
to ever
Yeah.
do anything else because someone else is doing it.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up with these kids who are wonderful kids. And I mean, I became close to some of my students, friends with some of my students. Years, decades later, I'm still friends with some of them. So it's not
Yeah.
that it's not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just what the system makes them into.
You read your book and you give so many anecdotes and so many examples. And I remember there was something you wrote about the selections process and kind of leafing through
Mm,
different applications. And these kids are just, I mean, they're everything but a Nobel Prize winning physicist or what
yeah,
have you. But at some point, you said some kid had just like gargantuan numbers of extracurricular activities,
yeah,
and here's this kid who's just
yeah.
playing the game, playing so hard, and it was kind of dismissed, like almost like
Too
too
intense.
intense.
Yeah, just yeah,
So so and this is the same thing we're seeing with sports, where kids become single sport athletes when they're in third grade, and they're experiencing Tommy John surgery when they're in seventh grade. I mean, you
yes,
you just kind of come to
yes,
realize and say, where on earth did people, how on earth did people all of a sudden become so unidimensional in the name of this one point in the hourglass, and you're describing
yes.
this. Bill, I want, there's a word and a phrase you use. I want you, this kind of speaks to what we're talking about: credentialism and the resume arms race. Just say a few words about these
Right.
things.
So this is, I mean, credentialism is the idea that life consists, and especially, again, this young life before you get to college, but the truth is it continues. So life consists of accumulating credentials. And a
Mhm.
credential, it doesn't, I mean, part of the problem is that it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the person except that they have the credential. But a credential
Yeah.
is something that can show up on a resume, right? So if it can't show up on a resume, if you can't turn it into a credential, like reading for pleasure or hanging out with your friends, or just playing an instrument but not doing it in a way that can show up in a resume, like being in the band, then you don't do it. And the resume arms race, I mean, as we said already, like once this system started, and it really, I mean, I trace the history in the book, sort of late 60s is when it started. And pretty quickly families, middle class, upper middle class families figured out what was going on and figured out how to, I won't say game the system, but what the system involves. Like, what did you need to do to produce a kid who's going to be able to get in to, a highly selective college? And then everyone was off to the races. And like the nuclear arms race, the only purpose of having more is to have more than the next guy.
Yeah. There's never a point where you can rest. There's never a point of satisfaction. As soon as you stop paddling your arms so hard, the current's going to sweep you down the river.
Because someone is swimming faster than you. But again, I want to underscore that all of this, enrichment, all of these courses, all these extracurriculars, they aren't necessarily doing anything for you other than the credential, right?
Yeah.
And this is where sort of the intellectual shallowing out happens, because you're not actually thinking about, in a deep way, all, the 10 AP courses you're taking. You're just, robotically. I mean, it's really sad. I mean, there's all these mental health implications of this. You're just robotically trudging through this endless marathon of achievement.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about what this looks like when we get further downstream, because obviously, like you said, you're writing this book, and so much of what you're writing in this book is seeing the kids that you talk about how they made it, but then you see the kids that have made it, and you're kind of looking at the blowback. I mean, the thing is people say, "Oh, I crossed the threshold. I got the acceptance letter. Life was grand from that point forward." And you're like, I'm staring at these scared, directionless, kind of, very capable, but fundamentally stunted kids in many cases who I feel so, I mean, they're going to do fine.
Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't.
Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But it's interesting to see kind of what's the legacy of this on the other side of the hourglass. So an excellent sheep, you highlight a paradox. So out of inertia and safety, you'd write a violent aversion to risk. Many very talented students sometimes just settle for majors that lead to jobs with prestige and high salaries. This is once they're in, and we're gonna kind of go back and forth a little bit. So they settle for majors that lead to jobs with prestige and high salaries. However, these same students are not passionate about this work and often find themselves in crisis when they find that they don't like their jobs. So how can such great, quote unquote, and you just kind of did a nice job of chastening my phrasing of say, they'll do fine. And you're like, yes, some will, some won't. How can what is deemed to be great success beget such little discernment?
Well, because there's no discernment going on at all. I mean, so a big part of this and a big part of the unhappiness, and that's of course what I meant when I said maybe they'll be okay, maybe they won't. They may look like they're okay. Comes from the fact that kids are doing all of these things because the grown-ups told them that they should. They are not doing it from what the psychologists call intrinsic motivation. It's all external motivation. And external motivation, it's when you only act out of external motivation, you don't know who you are. You don't develop an understanding of just me, which can sound kind of hippy dippy or abstract, but it just means like, what do you care about? What do you like to do? How do you define a fulfilling life? I mean, obviously, if we're talking about kids, it's not about how they define it, but it's about going through a long process where they learn to figure out what they think a fulfilling life is. But they're not even given the chance to start down that path because the question just doesn't come up. The question is, how are you going to jump over the next hurdle? And that is an endless question. I just want to say one thing about, you said they get in and they think everything's great. Big part of the tragedy is that college admissions, it is the choke point, but once you get through it and once you're on campus, you realize that it was a false summit, which I think is the word that hikers use, right? You're climbing up the hill and you think you're about to get to the top, and you get there and you turn a corner and then there's another summit. That's what achievement culture is, right? So almost as soon as they get there, they find out that there are these other things to aspire to. And again, that can structure all of college. Like, oh my God, I want to get a job with a consulting firm when I graduate. I need to get an internship before senior year. And in order to do that, I need to get a less prestigious one or, another one before junior year. And in order to do that, and so on and so forth, right? And it just becomes, and it, it sometimes never ends. And I quote the longtime director of admissions at Harvard. He was in his job for like 30 plus years, saying that he would meet alumni, who are now in middle age at reunions at Harvard, and they struck him as survivors of a lifelong boot camp.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's an essay that I assigned to my medical students and residents that was written by this young intern named Sonia Singh. It's called Morning Report, and it talks about her. She's I think internal medicine, or she might be a family practice intern out in California, and she's just grinding through her day, just seeing patients and answering calls, writing notes, examining people. I mean, just there's never enough time to do everything she's supposed to do because she's got to get it all done with all these patients. The first bit of rounding as an intern, first year residency, before she gets to Morning Report. And she finds herself running just up against Morning Report at 10 o'clock in the morning, where you're going to go and learn with the other residents and so on, that she walks into a room with somebody who has a nurse who's a patient who's going to assuredly be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And she quote unquote makes the mistake of sitting down with her and holding her hand. And they have a moment. Where the patient wells up, the resident wells up with her, and it's just gone in a fleeting second. But there's a moment of serious communion in that holding of the hand and sitting on the bed. She gets down to Morning Report. She gets a page with the pathology results. Indeed, it's pancreatic cancer. But then she's caught flat-footed by a question in conference where everybody's staring at her. She wasn't really listening, and she feels like a fool because she gets the question wrong. And she basically says, I had to wrestle with what are the 60 seconds of my day that were most important. The 60 seconds I sat in the bed with this patient, had a moment, which you would never put on a resume, by the way, like you said, or the 60 seconds where I was trying to strut and elbow my way as the smartest person in my residency. It strikes me that, like you said, these kids are in the race for the summit that proves to be false summits. And at the end of the day, they're missing the true summit of what life is about. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I think it is fair to say. I mean, I don't want to make enormously sweeping claims about every single kid, but yes, I would say broadly speaking, and I think we see this. I mean, I think people experience this. People who live this life of relentless achievement can feel like they've missed out on the most important things, and maybe sometimes it's moments in their kids' lives, or maybe it comes at the cost of their relationship with their partner. And look, I mean, my students concealed this from me when I was teaching them. Even the ones that I became close to, in other words, the one who opened up to me about their confusions or frustrations about college or about their career. But it was only later that they started to admit to me how miserable all this had made them. Wow. So we're talking about an intern or a parent, but I'm saying even in college and undoubtedly earlier, you're missing out on some of the most important stuff, maybe the most important stuff in life. Development of friendships, so crucial in that stage of life. Your first real romantic relationships. I think all of this gets slighted in this system.
Yeah. Bill, from tiger moms to helicopter parents, something has changed in the raising of kids nowadays. And as you write in Excellent Sheep, quote, the whole of childhood and adolescence across a large swath of society is now constructed with a single goal in mind. All the values that once informed the way we raise our children, the cultivation of curiosity, the inculcation of character, the instillment of a sense of membership in one's community, the development of the capacity for democratic citizenship, let alone any emphasis on the pleasure and freedom of play, the part of childhood where you actually got to be a child. All of these are gone. Bill, can you just say something about the role parents have had? We've talked about it a little bit, but is the insanity? Is it? I mean, I know there's a lot of points to blame here, but what's your sense about parents getting swept up in this? Are they innocent victims of a system that is rolling over the top of them? Are they willing participants that could just say, no, this is enough? What's your sense about that?
I think it's really hard for parents. I have a lot of sympathy for parents. I don't want to just blame them.
Sure.
Maybe I did a little bit in Excellent Sheep, but after Excellent Sheep, since Excellent Sheep, I've spoken to a lot of parent groups, typically at private high schools.
Mm-hmm.
They'll bring me in. Typically, it's mostly moms who come. And the ones who come are the ones who are already concerned about their kids. So I would say
Yeah.
that it's a spectrum. I mean, there are definitely some parents like Tiger Mom who made a brand out of this, who just have
Yeah.
I mean, she's like, yeah, full speed ahead. This is
Yeah.
okay. There are people like that who are just completely crazed about status, think that their kid is worthless or they're worthless if they didn't go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, and either ignore the mental health implications and the spiritual implications or think that it's all going to work out. I think more likely it's like, oh, they'll get past this, which they don't.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there are parents who undoubtedly who just drop out altogether and say, I'm not going to play this game. We're going to send the kid to a different school or we're going to move to a different community. And I think there are a lot of parents like the ones who've come to hear me speak and to tell me their thoughts who are really torn because we do
Mm.
listen. Part of what's structuring all this is that we live in an increasingly unequal society of winners and losers, and it's not just that things for the losers are getting worse. I mean, they are, but really what's happening is that the rewards for the winners are becoming so immense, right?
Mm.
So that's part, so the sense that like I need to make sure, I know this maybe is hard for my kid, but I need to get them over this line so that they can be part of the winners.
Mm.
And what do I, and what's the alternative? I mean, I think parents who are in that situation, who are in communities that are full of other high achieving families and sending their kids to schools, public or private, with lots of high achieving kids where the goal is to get into a highly selective school, probably it's hard for them to even conceive that there are alternatives.
Mm.
Quite possibly the alternatives that are immediately available to them, like the kids are going to a private school and the local public school is really just not very good.
Mm-hmm.
So their
Mm-hmm.
alternatives are not so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Bill, let's talk a little bit about there's the two words, all many things you write in this work are worth pondering. The two words I will also want to move into next is the notion of aristocracy versus
Mm.
meritocracy. So has there been, you described kind of earlier years, especially among the Ivy League, and kind of what was looked for,
Yeah.
club ability and the service orientation, obviously family connections, all this kind of stuff. Moving kind of further into test scores and SATs and ACTs and
Yeah.
things of that nature. Has there been a true transition from aristocracy to meritocracy, or is it a hybrid, or what would you say of it right now?
Right. So the history on this is really quite clear, and there are some great books about this that I read when I was writing Excellent Sheep.
Yeah.
There was a system for the Harvards and Yales and Princetons for much of their existence where these schools just took, you know, upper class boys, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant
Mm.
men who went to boarding schools or other private schools. I mean, and it was.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk more about it, but it was a very kind of handshake kind of admissions arrangement,
Mm-hmm.
and it started to be clear that this was increasingly untenable because there were too many other groups in society, early mid 20th century, who had claims to entering the upper middle class and the elite, and we were leaving too much talent on the table, and there was too much pressure.
Yeah.
Jews and Catholics and women. Okay, so starts the change in the 30s. The big change happens in the 60s, and pretty quickly there's a pivot from this system where if you went to Groton, you got into Harvard, pretty much no questions asked. And if you were a really smart Jewish kid from a public high school in New York City, there was a quota, right? To what I do think in many ways is legitimately understood as a meritocracy, based and largely based on things like scores and grades and a significant de-emphasis of all the other sort of informal things. And it transformed the populations at elite schools, and it very quickly transformed the composition of the American, lack of a better word, leadership class, professional managerial class. Became multiracial, it became multi-confessional, it became coeducational. This was a huge change. This was a real thing.
Yeah.
I do think elements of the aristocracy survived. They didn't want to completely, alienate their alumni, but by and large, I think that's pretty vestigial. However, and this is what I taught, this is a lot of what Excellent Sheep is about. In some ways, there's been a reconstruction of a different kind of aristocracy through the very mechanisms that are supposed to create a meritocracy. Because how do you get your kid into one of these schools? You have to stuff them full of educational resources from as early as they can start to swallow them, which might mean pre-K. And that costs a lot of money. Tutors, coaches, violin lessons, enriching travel, sending your kid to a private school, or being able to afford a house in a district that has really good public schools, Greenwich or something like that. This all takes money, and it has enabled this class to reproduce itself in a way that it wasn't intended to. Right? It's supposed to be an open competition where the best people win, and yet you end up with classes at highly selective schools where 60%, 2/3 of the students come from the top 20% of the income distribution.
Yeah.
And actually, it's the middle that in some ways is missing the most. I mean, you have a certain number of students, generally students of color, who are, maybe from the bottom 40% or 20%. And it's that kind of middle class, you're not poor enough to, for that kind of affirmative action, but you're not that get shut out.
Yeah. This was a really kind of an epiphany for me in the notion that when you look at all of the different programs or initiatives that try to diversify populations and so on, one of the images you gave in the book was you can go to a campus, you can look and talk to people who are of different ethnicities, different confessional, different religions, obviously men and women and so on. But the one uniform quality that if you really dug deeper was the vast majority of this multifaceted people on campus are wealthy.
Right.
They're well to do. And so to your point, you say there still exists somewhat of an entrenched classism, if you will, that outlives race, gender, and religious biases and so on. And I like you said, not to say there aren't exceptions and so on, but because you said it's not inexpensive to take travel for edification, to take ACT classes or SAT classes, and to be on the lacrosse team and so on. So
I think it's not appreciated enough that many of the students, even from racially disadvantaged groups at elite schools, actually come from quite comfortable families. Yes.
Yeah. Bill, in Excellent Sheep, you write, quote, "Beyond the junior careerism, the directionless ambition, the risk aversion, and the Hobbesian competitiveness, the system cultivates a monumental cynicism. The process takes activities that used to be ends in themselves and reduces them to means. No wonder they have lost their souls. Athletics means no more than physical training. Music means technical proficiency. Service means charity. Leadership means climbing to the top. We mandate activities So we reward joiners. We insist on leadership, so we reward climbers. We value those who give us what we want, so we reward manipulators. We punish those who will not play the game. We're robbing children of their childhood and teenagers of their adolescence. We've engineered a vast regimentation of youth. Close quote. Bill, you're such a good writer. I mean, this is just, I'm page turning when I'm reading this. It's hard not to. Before we move into our next segment, and I'm not trying to return to the grand question again and again and again, but it kind of begs asking: is there any way kids can avoid getting stunted in a system like
Right.
this?
So for me, this question gets back to also the question about parents, like what can parents do? And
Yeah.
it's really hard. And I make no bones about this when I talk to kids and when I talk to parents. I think the way out of this situation for individual kids and families is to refuse to play the game, or to play the game all the way, which in a sense is refusing to play the game. But, and this is what I make no bones about, it's going to cost you. If you stop running as fast as the rest of the pack, then yeah, there probably will be less chance of you to get into the most elite school and to put the window sticker in the car and to be able to tell
Yeah.
yourself for the rest of your life that, you went to Brown. But this is the next sentence. It's a trade-off either way. Don't think that if you keep playing the race, you aren't giving up a lot. So then the question is, what is more important for you to hold on to, and what can you let go of? And I tell kids, high school kids, college kids, don't believe me, don't listen to me, don't trust me, you don't know me. Consult your own feelings, your own inner life. Is this working for you? And some kids, like they want to be an engineer, they want to be a doctor, they really have a passion for that, so they know what they need to do. That's totally fine. It's not like you should never do that. But if you're just doing it because you know you're supposed to and you don't know why, and it's making you miserable, you need to understand, that it's not going to change unless you make a change. You're going to be one of those middle-aged survivors of a lifelong boot camp.
Yeah.
So then it's a matter of making a long series of small decisions. Am I going to jump through one more hoop? Am I going to join one more extracurricular, take one more extra AP? Or am I going to clear some space for all the other things? There's a great organization. It's connected to Stanford. It's called Challenge Success. And they talk about PDF, which means playtime, downtime, and family time. That's what kids need to make more room for, and that's what parents need to help them make more room for.
Segment 2, a vocation, not a job. When I'm talking with my pre-med undergrads, medical students, or internal medicine residents, I sound like a broken record. If you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and all this time of your youth on a job, then you should get your money back. The cost is too high. But if you did it because you were answering a call, pursuing a vocation, now that is magic. So, Bill, let's talk a little bit about universities in their current form. You do a nice job of kind of the natural history of how the universities became what they are, specifically talking about the influence of the English college and the German research universities. Could you say a few words about those?
Oh, yeah, sure. So our American colleges and universities, even the colleges, but especially the universities, inherit this twin mission that comes from two different institutional sources. And one is the liberal arts college, as it came to our shores from England, starting with the colonial colleges, which became the Ivy League colleges. And the other thing, which was invented in Berlin in 1810, the modern research university. The first one was the University of Berlin, and it was this new idea. As science starts to mature into the modern form in which it exists now, and then the social sciences, of a knowledge factory. And I don't say this in a negative way, these great research institutions that have substantially helped create the modern world, that power the economy, that have made incredible discoveries of nature. But these two institutions are now housed together. And so the same institution, Columbia, where I went, is both a research university, but it also has an undergraduate division called Columbia College. And in my view, a lot of the problem with the way undergraduate education college works now is precisely that it's being housed within an institution. I mean, I've been talking about this twin mission, but actually one of those two missions is much, much more important for the schools than the other, and that is the research mission. That's where the funding is. That's how professors are trained. That's how they're rewarded. Publish or perish, right? So what gets slighted is teaching the liberal arts, an idea of a college education that is about something more than vocational preparation and specialization. And it's in the context of that sort of college idea and what it might entail in a college career, like general education courses, core curricula, long office hours, open-ended office hours conversations with professors, that the kinds of things that are missing that we've been talking about, right? Like developing your soul, for lack of a better word, developing your vocation, because that's what you're talking about now, figuring out who you are, what you care about, what you think is important in life, the good, the beautiful, and the true. It's in that context that needs to get developed, that does get developed. It's what it was designed for, the college idea, but it's gotten squeezed out.
Yeah, I mean, so when I'm reading this book, I keep coming back to a speech I heard, and you maybe were there for it, from Donald Kagan. I think he gave this speech at Yale. It was like, do you remember Donald Kagan,
I certainly,
professor
I didn't know him personally, but I certainly know who he is.
Yeah, he gave a speech at one point, and I think it was his kind of valedictory as he's walking into the sunset. For those who are unfamiliar with Donald Kagan, as I know it, he was this kind of poor kid in New York who had no other kids no other family members went to college. I think he went to the City University of New York or something like that, or
City College, sure.
somewhere. Yeah, and he ended up finding his way into the classics, taking one of the toughest teachers who apparently was just brutal to the kids, but he wanted to show her he had the stuff, fell in love with her as a teacher, fell in love with the classics, got his graduate degree at Ohio State, ultimately ended up at Yale and wrote the seminal work on Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War, which people have compared to the works of Herodotus or something along those lines. But the point is that in his walking away from teaching I think he ended up teaching at Yale for a number of years, being a chair of departments and so on and so forth. He kind of said, we've lost kind of what you're saying. We've lost the sense of educating the complete man or the complete woman. There's this hyper reductionist, hyper materialist, uber specialized entity that goes out in this kind of warped, kind of Quasimodo fashion to kind of seize upon a problem and solve it, and has no sense of larger context of what it means to be human, and not for the sake of being some sort of ostentatious or arrogant, socialite that can quote things, but for the sole reason of having a reason for living and celebrating life in and of itself. So you have a quote in Excellent Sheep, and you said, when kids go to college, they hear a speech or two that urges them to ask the big questions. And when they graduate, they hear another speech or two that urges them to ask the big questions. And in between, they spend 4 years taking courses that train them to answer the questions, answer the little questions, specialized courses taught by specialized professors aimed at specialized students, close quote. So Bill, you're singing from this songbook, you're writing this songbook about the complete person. Say a few words about forming the complete person as opposed to training the specialist.
Right. So I should say that this is a very old theme in not just in writing about higher education. I mean, Kagan talked about it. I've written about it. Many people have written about it. It's a theme in the whole of modernity, leaving college aside, right? I mean, this is sort of what the romantic critique of early industrialization was, that we are producing these monsters of specialization, someone who you could imagine it physically, like your right arm is very highly developed because you have a job that just works your right arm and the rest of your body is withered. I mean, this is a metaphor. Maybe in some cases it's literally true.
Makes sense.
So this has been a critique of modernity from the beginning. And it's this idea that our economic life has become more and more differentiated, right? Specialized and subspecialized and sub-subspecialized. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, this is how knowledge is developed, and how, as knowledge becomes more elaborated and more differentiated, and the economy the same, we have smaller and smaller economic niches that we're supposed to fill. And we train ourselves sometimes not just for 16 years, but I mean, you're a doctor, then, maybe another 7 years or more to do, and good. So you can do this one operation really, really well. And when I need that operation, I want you to be able to do that, and so on and so forth. But, and this was recognized from the beginning and recognized in higher education from the beginning, there's the rest of life.
Yeah.
And what does the rest of life involve? And how can we help young people find their way to a robust and fulfilling rest of life? Or maybe I shouldn't even make that distinction. We even want them to be able to do their own vocation. You were talking about the intern, the intern. This is exactly the idea. You want to be able to, I mean, listen, I think this is what makes the best teachers. I think it's what makes the best doctors, is when you can bring your whole self. You need to have your specialized skills and your specialized knowledge, but ideally you bring your whole self to the task. And you can't bring your whole self to the task unless you have a whole self. And you have a whole self by having other things in your life. First of all, not just doing your specialized thing, but also I think it's useful, maybe it's necessary, to have a measure of self-reflection and introspection.
Yeah.
To think about in a mindful way, and as they would say, a metacognitive way, what the heck it is you're doing. And I think that that's a lot of what the non-specialized part of college, which is sometimes called general education, but there's it's completely fallen apart, general education. It's not what it's supposed to be. But that is what it's supposed to be. I mean, I think you read challenging works of literature and philosophy and maybe some religious studies and so forth. And it's good to know those things and to engage with sort of the best minds and to engage with your peers. But fundamentally, the most important reason you're doing that is to equip you to think about fundamental questions in your own life. What do you care about? What do you think is good and beautiful and true? What is worth doing with your life? How do you find your way to a life that feels like your life, the life that you were meant to live, a life where the outer life, that which you do in the world, is a reflection of your inner life, who you feel yourself to be inside, which I think is how you have a fulfilling career.
Yeah. Well, isn't the nature of crises in people's careers when this dawns on them too late?
Yes.
When they realize, or either they're burned out or they're saying, why wasn't I thinking about this for the last 30 years? I've gone terribly down the wrong path. What you and I have also talked about a lot, the true, the good, and the beautiful. The other thing is, in the Catholic tradition under Aquinas, that beware the surrogates for God, honor, power, pleasure, wealth. Everybody's chasing this in this whole book. It's the chasing of this chimera of what you think will make you happy, when in fact, like you said, it's a false summit. You get there and say, wait a second, there's more. Not only is this summit not the end of the summitry, the mountaineering, I'm not even really particularly happy that I made it.
Why am I even
this
climbing this
place?
mountain?
Why am I even climbing this mountain? So it's, to my way of thinking, and this is a little bit about where I'll bring a lot of literature into my education of medical students and residents, because it's sort of like you have to be as good of a student of human nature as you are of the human body. That includes yourself, and so you have to ponder these greater things in the midst of pondering the specialty that you want to be very good at, the facts you need to know, the diagnostic skills you need to have, but you need to be able to answer the questions to the why in the midst of the how. So I your voice, like I said to you, I think before we got on the recording, I don't want to call you a Cassandra because you're not a prophet of doom. You are a voice crying in a wilderness, though, that is very resonating with so many people that are saying, "What's missing in this chase? What's missing in this game to keep climbing?" And you're saying, "How about meaning? How about purpose? How about the grander things that get sort of jettisoned in the mad dash towards quote unquote success?"
That's right. But I mean, students students themselves think about this. I mean,
Yeah.
not all of them, and some of them just sort of push these questions aside. But literally yesterday, I was invited to do a podcast for a new organization at elite schools, and I think they're trying to have them as many schools as possible. It's called Class Action. It was largely organized by students, and it's precisely about this problem that we're talking about. I mean, they specifically
Hmm.
think of it in terms of what they call career funneling. Like, how is it that
Hmm.
you get to Yale, and if you polled freshmen their first week, you get a whole range of answers about what they want to do with their lives, and then they start to hear about this thing called consulting, and they start to learn about the pipelines to Wall Street. And of course, now
Yeah.
this doesn't even show up in Excellent Sheet because it's tech, right? So
Yeah.
literally over half of students from elite schools are going into finance, consulting, and tech. I mentioned law and medicine in Excellent Sheep. Law and medicine are kind of getting, are shrinking because
Sidelined.
because people have now they have these better options.
Yeah.
And this is why the kids themselves are talking about this. It's like, why are you doing this? And they recognize that a lot of it is just the path of least resistance. It's the path of least resistance and the path of least, you touched on this earlier, least risk.
Yeah.
I think you need to be able to take a little bit of a risk with your life if you're going to have a life that you enjoy living.
You highlight this. I mean, we all know this sense. Here's a person who goes through Yale, gets this education, and they see, this, I think it's a young woman. She sees her classmates going to Wall Street or going to consult or whatever they're going, and she's like, I don't know if it was she wanted to teach or she
Yeah.
wanted to do something that was going to earn significantly
Yeah.
less and was not going to be considered on the social strata at the level of social strata as her partners, and she has this angst about what if I pursue what I want to do, and yet my friends pursue
Yeah.
what they are quote unquote educated to do, and they're going to get money, and
Yeah.
they're going to have a place in the
Yeah.
Hamptons
Yeah.
and all those things, and I'm going to kind of be struggling by. Will I be ashamed of my family? Will I regret it? Will I be looked down upon? What about the status game? I can't quite get out of it. You can feel just this weight on this person's shoulders, in that discernment process.
It's really sad. I've continued to travel the country when I'm invited to talk to kids. And I was at Williams College a couple of years ago. It's the top ranked college among the liberal arts colleges, and it's draws very talented students and has great financial aid. And it's like the entire campus, I realized after a couple of days there, was this vortex circling finance and consulting. And there are actually specific banks and specific consultancies, mainly in Boston, because it's a Western Massachusetts school. But I say this because I had lunch with 4 students. One wanted to be a teacher, one wanted to be a writer, and 2 of them wanted to start small businesses. They weren't even sure what businesses, they just liked the idea of starting a small business. And none of the
Yeah.
4 were going to do the thing that they wanted to do. They weren't going to be a teacher, a writer, and 2 small business people. They were going to go to finance and consulting.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Oh, this book offers so much, including you weigh in on kind of the discernment of a vocation. I'm kind of mashing up 2
Yeah.
questions together. You highlight a legendary Columbia professor who would say to his incoming freshman class, "You're here for selfish reasons. You're here to build a self." You quote Andrew Delbanco, who has written that college offers students, quote, "the precious chance to think and reflect before life engulfs them." And you want to go on to say the classroom is a grain of sand, and it's up to you to make the pearl. Now, I'm going to move further into your some of your advice on how to discern a vocation. You write this, and I imagine parents that have their kid on the track, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't want them to read what Bill's
Yes.
writing here because they're on a track, man. And it says here, do what you do spontaneously. Back when you were younger, before all spontaneity got beaten out of you, do what you would choose to do anyway, even if you didn't get rewarded for it. Do the thing that you can immerse yourself in for hours at a time. You know, the thing you wish you could do instead of what you're doing now. Just do that thing. Do what you love to. And I love this because you're like you're in my head. Do what you love to do the most. No, not that. Not what you think you love or think you ought to love, but what you really love. And then you added, don't try to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. You're going to be a very different person in 2 to 3 years, and that person will have his own ideas, close quote. Now, Bill, you wrote this 12 years ago, but you were in the head of millions of kids telling them something that runs contrary to this system and yet resonates with what it means to be who you authentically are.
Yeah, I do want to say, just like I said before, that you're going to give up something if you step off the path, but you're giving up something either
trade-off.
way. I don't want to be glib about this. You need to make a living.
Yeah.
And many of these choices that are not the lucrative ones that everyone's rushing towards make it harder to make a living. In some cases, very, very hard, so much so that you need to have another job if you want to be a writer, if you want to be a musician, at least while you're establishing yourself, which can take a very long time. So what I say is, there's the thing you want to do. So, of course, the first challenge is to figure out the thing you want to do, and that's what we're talking about. But there's the thing you want to do, and there's the thing the world expects you to do, which is pay your bills.
Yeah.
Just the goal is to get the second thing as close as possible to the first thing, as opposed to just giving up on the first thing.
Yeah.
And you know, that resting point between the two poles is going to be different for everybody. And you aren't probably going to be able to live the perfect exact life that you want to live, but you want to try to get as close to it as you can instead of just giving up.
When I'm talking to my daughters, I have one who's a freshman in college, the other one's a junior in high school. One of the things that I've said to them again and again, I said, there's many ways to look at what you feel called to do, and you have to open yourself up to the notion of vocation and calling. And as a Catholic, I believe there's God is involved in this mix. But the three things I say you've got to try to answer for yourself in this process is first, like you said, can I survive on this? Because if you want to do something and yet you can't pay the bills, you're going to be doing something else to pay the bill. Right. So can I survive on this to the degree that I can be comfortable or content with what that means? Okay. Because you and I both know there's people with the beer income champagne lifestyle that there's a constant tension there. So can I survive in this to the degree that I can be satisfied? Secondly, am I passionate about it? Do I enjoy this? Is this something that I get up in the morning to want to do? And thirdly, do I find something is this something that's consistent with my value set, my purpose in life, and so on? Now, obviously, wedded in all that is your skill set and aptitudes and so on. But if, to your point, I love the fact that you're saying you're bringing these two things together. And my side is I'm bringing these three things together. I can make it work financially. I can be passionate about it, enjoy it, and I can derive meaning. So I reflect on it later in life and say, hey, look, this was a life well lived, and so on. And to your point, again and again, when you see these kids going to Williams who want to run a small business and they're going to end up on Wall Street with a big financial firm, the question is, yeah, you can survive on it, but the other two or the other one that you're trying to meld with it, how much do you like it? How much is this consistent with your values? How much does this scratch the itch of your one ride in life that you've arrived?
Yes. I mean, look, for what it's worth, there are surveys of, I actually think, doctors and lawyers and bankers, I don't know that we have them as our consultants, that show that they're really unhappy. Like their levels of happiness are really low. And their levels of, depression and suicidal ideation and divorce and substance abuse are really high. But I also want to say, we were talking about the pressure to succeed. I know that when students hear what we're saying now, that can feel like a lot of pressure. Like, oh my God, I have to find my vocation. And any word, passion, purpose, like any word you put on it, it can become this expectation that feels really daunting.
Yeah.
So I want to say to any young people who are listening and their parents, it's a process. It's a process, and it can take time. And I mean, I think you need to be able to give yourself that time. it took me several years after I finished college. And I mean, Dustin Hoffman, I think his talk at the Actors Studio said that the 20s are the question mark decade. Your 20s are the question mark decade. Maybe it doesn't take the full decade, but I think, and maybe parents are freaking out, like, oh my God, my kid's going to be living in my basement until they're 35. And I understand that. And I also understand that the financial realities are different than what I had to deal with coming up. It was a lot easier in the 80s because costs were different. But
yeah,
I think you need to, you know how, I just thought about this. You know how, like, when you need to get something done, if you only give yourself 15 minutes, like, it can take 4 hours because but if you give yourself not even 4 hours, but just an unlimited amount of time, it can happen. It's not just that it happens faster, but it happens. I mean, like, something releases and relaxes. This is true for me when I'm writing. Like, I can't have a deadline. At least not on any given day when I sit down. It's like, you have to be able to sink into it. You have to be able to give you as much time as it takes. Give yourself as much time as it takes. And I think this business of finding your way in life is the same. It's the same. You need to give yourself as much time as it takes.
I think that's great advice. And if you think about it, it's sort of like falling in love or having a best friend. You don't have an algorithm for that.
That's right.
You don't have it. Well, this is the way. Right. This is the script of our conversation. This is the script of how we fall in love. It happens. And yes, there's a certain amount of, you got to remember, anticipate, don't screw up the anniversary. And remember that if your partner does not like eating, this type of food, you should go to a different. I mean, there's some calculation that goes in that. But to your point, and I can say this for my own self, landing where I'm on this conversation with you. How for me, starting off as a physician and doing that still, but doing this kind of on the side, it was never that wasn't planned. It was this meandering crooked line course that you organically allow to unfold with who you are, what your desires are, what opportunities open themselves up, what providential engagements, and so on and so forth. And you think about for you as well. I mean, look what you're doing right now compared to where you were when you were at Columbia or teaching at Yale and so on. So you never probably anticipated you'd be writing a book that would be so influential, rooted in what you think maybe not going quite right with all these kids after all your experience going through your formative education, also your teaching, and yet here you are, and you let it happen, like you said, you allowed it to organically unfold, but you had your eyes open the whole time.
This is so important. I mean, my parents were immigrants, and they wanted, they pushed us to succeed, and they pushed us to get through it as quickly as possible. And I totally understand that, but they gave me this idea that life was really linear, and you followed a very specific sequence, and it led to a very particular goal, endpoint. And again, I mean, this was my father's life, and I understand that, growing up as an immigrant. But I don't think that's how most successful people's lives, successful in any terms you want to use. Well, maybe I shouldn't say successful, like lives that you would want to emulate, right? Like somebody you admire, I mean, a lot of people say Steve Jobs, whatever, but he's a good example of this, right? It's like serendipity, providential encounters, throwing yourself. This is also why, for a lot of people, you can't figure it out while you're still in college. You need to be in the world. You need to have these random encounters with people, but also just like with situations that will draw out of you things you didn't realize were in you. And which is what happened to me.
Yeah. Rainer Maria Rilke writes a book. He writes the letters to a young poet, and he says to this young poet who's a young man in a hurry, he says, you got to live the questions for now. You got to live the questions for now. So that some point at some time in the future, the answers may come into their fullness. He says, everything must come to term before it is born. Everything must come to term before it is born. And so it's exactly what you're saying. And I think that I'm so glad you paused, because I've been using a lot of the vocation language and calling and passion and so on and so forth. And yet you're right. There is a pressure. There's another form of pressure that comes that, well, what if I don't know what my calling is? And what if I'm misunderstanding it? What if I'm on the wrong calling? And and to your point, it's sort of like, take a deep breath, know yourself, do the PDF. What is a play, downtime, family?
Right.
Reacquaint yourself with the non-resume oriented stuff
Yes.
so that you can better understand where you want your resume to go,
Yes.
so to speak.
Yes. And I mean, speaking as someone who's in his 60s now, those early years of young adulthood are just, they're magical. They don't happen again.
Yeah.
They're this incredible, just burgeoning and blossoming. And in every respect, I mean, vocational, romantic, friends, travel. What a shame not to let yourself experience that. Because, I mean, you may make a lot of money and be able to like retire early and then you'll have time. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all because, when you're a young adult, you are wet clay. You haven't set yet. And then later you might have all the money and opportunity in the world, but you're hardened and it's not going to change. So much about you will no longer change. And the real adventure is ultimately it's the inner adventure, right? It's not what you do externally. It's what happens internally from the things that you do externally. Yeah, and the chance for that adventure is when you're young, really.
Hi, I'm Tod Worner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, How to Think. Practical utility, William Deresiewicz writes in Excellent Sheep, is not the ultimate purpose of a liberal arts education. Its ultimate purpose is to help you learn to reflect in the widest and deepest sense. He goes on to say that some people sneer, saying, no one cares how well you can talk about Hume or Kant. Maybe not, Deresiewicz writes, but they care how well you talk. They care how well you can think and study the most challenging works of literature and philosophy. Being forced every day to think about the hardest things people have ever thought about is the best training you can give yourself in how to talk and think. So, Bill, I want to ask you, and this is a short segment because I know I want to be respectful of your time, but a short final segment. How many vocations are defined by how you think more than what you know? And I'm not saying what you know, data expertise, et cetera, isn't important. But tell me about your sense about vocations defined more on the frame and the crafting of the mind, the lens through which you look at things, versus the information that has been kind of poured into it.
Well, I want to stipulate that I'm not an expert on careers, and I don't want to, speak beyond what I'm really able to say. But, I mean, the truth is that the passage you just quoted isn't about learning to think for the joy of thinking and reading for the sake of reading, which I do think college, the best part of college, is about. The part that you read is really my attempt to explain to students why what they major in is much less important than they think it is. And that if they really think the idea of majoring in history or English or religious studies sounds really cool and interesting, but oh my God, what's going to happen to me after I graduate? They should let themselves do that. Because as far as I understand, and I have read about it and I have listened to people talk about this who do know much better than I do about careers, mostly employers do care about how well you think and talk, not what you learned in college. They will teach you, or you will pick up very quickly, when you get your job, the job specific knowledge and even the job specific skills in the narrow sense that you need to do your job. What an employer can't teach you is how to think through problems, how to think independently, how to take initiative, how to speak and write.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're looking for. They're not looking. I mean, this idea that you should. There isn't. The point is, there isn't. I mean, there are exceptions, maybe in like certain technical fields, engineering fields, but by and large, there is not a one-to-one correspondence between what you study and what you do. And I think the statistic I saw is that 70% of college graduates above a certain age, but it's only like 10 years out of college, I think, 70% are not working in fields directly related to their undergraduate major, because that's not how the economy works. You want sort of general rather than general capacities rather than very specific skills and knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think you develop those general capacities by thinking as hard as you can, which means taking courses that are challenging and also courses that are interesting to you, because if they're interesting, you're actually going to want to do the thinking.
Yeah. A corollary to this is for those going into, this is a particular pet interest of mine, for those going into certain scientific fields, how do the humanities purify their thinking? So why should a doctor read Shakespeare? Why should an engineer read Dante? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this goes back to the whole person thing. I mean, aside from the fact that you want to prepare yourself for all of your life, because you're going to have to live your whole life, not just your job. I also think, and I think the argument is different depending on what you're doing, but if you're a doctor, certainly if you're a doctor in primary care, it's a slam dunk. It's like, you need to be a human being. You need to be able to. Yeah. And I got to say, speaking from the patient population of the medical equation, specialists are hopeless. I mean, they're hopeless. They're not capable of engaging. And it's not only is it a really alienating experience, I think that it can be detrimental even for the medicine, because they're not really listening a lot of the time.
Well, and I for my friends who are specialists out there, I want to say, let me frame up from my experience, and I'll say this: I think the trouble sometimes I have a number of people that I refer to that are, and forgive me, this sounds like I'm trying to patch up something, but I do want to say, those who do it well, those specialists that I send my patients to again and again and again, in the midst of their short visits with people, and it might be one time they see them, that's all there is to it. The best of them, and I know a number of them, but I also know there's a lot of others that are not that way. The best of them are the ones that have not lost the track of exactly what you're saying. Yeah. There's as William Osler, the iconic godfather of internal medicine, once said, "The good doctor treats the disease. The great doctor treats the patient who has a disease." These specialists treat the patient who has a disease and not the disease alone. So you're right. There's a cadre of them out there that I'm blessed to work with. But unfortunately, the pressures, but also just the mentality for a number of them is to walk away from that mindset.
That's beautiful. And it reminds me of something that my beloved mentor in graduate school said, which is that he doesn't teach classes, he teaches students. Mm. Yeah, exactly. And that's what it's ultimately all about. Do you see the person, whatever your job is, do you see the person in front of you? Are you connecting with them? Are you listening to them? Are you open to them and to the fact that they have this is a whole sort of human experience here. Like, we're not just talking about my kidney. It's like, I came to the office, I got in this paper gown that makes me feel really vulnerable, and I'm looking for care. I'm concerned about these symptoms. I'm worried about my life and how this is going to impact my life. Like, I want you to fix my kidney, but I also want you to see me as a human.
Exactly. Maya Angelou once said something along the lines that people will forget something like this. People will forget what you said to them, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And again, this doesn't mean that you should have an empathic idiot that's treating you. You want somebody who's very, very capable of what they're doing. But at the same time, it's like you said. I mean, it's just that's where I'm always struck in the field of medicine and a lot of other fields in the healing professions, where someone forgot to be healing.
Yes,
they're very adept at the technique and the technical aspects of their work, but they forgot that this is a person who's twice their age, who would confide nothing of this matter to anybody else because they would never go that route of being vulnerable. And here they sit
Yes.
before you vulnerable, and you're blowing it, man.
Yeah.
You're blowing
Yeah.
it, you know?
I think this also gets
So,
back, and again, I mean, you would think this isn't the case, but certainly in college teaching, you'd think, well, you're a professor, you're a teacher, but actually, you're also a specialist, and
yeah.
and and the point is that the specialization part of all of these jobs, first of all, it's very clear. You know exactly what you need to do. You can put it on a resume, or you can measure it, and it's also what you're rewarded for. Right? Publish
Mm,
or perish, or you're at the hospital and you're rewarded for however they reward you, right? So the human part of it, being a teacher, being a healer, it, there's you have to kind of slip it in almost to the detriment of your professional,
yeah.
right? So I mean, look, I mean, if we want to talk about larger structures, it would be great if these
Yeah.
institutions could start to recognize that and make room for it.
Yeah.
How can we help doctors to be
Well,
healers more, you know?
well, and here's one of my epiphanies along the way, and that is that the people that are in charge, they want that care for themselves and their
Mm,
families. And so it's one of those things where it's sort of like, okay, if you want that doc that isn't overly rushed, constantly late, hand on the doorknob, over ordering because they have little time to think, trying to put, as my dad would say, 10 pounds of manure in a 5-pound can,
mm.
then you got to recognize this. If you want that for yourself, you want that for your family, then what can be done to erect a structure like that so that it does the same for other people? And if you ask me, if doctors had more time and more engagement, care would actually, you would save money because there would be more trust, there would be more openness, there would be more of a delving into what the problem is, there'd be knowing the person better. I think there'd be less tests ordered, honestly, less tests ordered as opposed to self-defensive medicine and so on. So anyway, that's a whole nother podcast, but I appreciate you saying that because and you know this from the inside of the academic establishment out there, and I
Yeah,
could say a little bit about the medical establishment.
yeah.
Bill, you've been unbelievably generous with your time. I have one more question for you, among many, but I obviously I just really, really encourage people to read this book, Excellent Sheep, and they should also read your book, The End of Solitude, the collection of your essays, because the work you're doing is so very good, and it's putting your finger on the deeply humane and what can be an otherwise inhuman system at times. So finally, Bill, you've written about many desirables that can help the formation of a young student. So, a student with a curious mind, strong work ethic, hunger for truth, appetite for wisdom. You've also talked about professors with wisdom beyond intelligence, a passion for teaching, and a time for mentorship. The hurdles include the expense of college, the pretense that teaching is actually occurring, the discrimination against those truly without resources and those who don't play the game, and then the hyper specialized, uber efficient, reductionist approach at the expense of educating the complete person. So, Bill, are the students, the professors, the system, the society, are we just too far gone? In all honesty, is there hope for authentic change?
Well, let me say a couple things. As nobody needs to be told, there's tremendous contention now around higher education. And for the first time, I think, a dawning sense. There's that Yale report. I don't know if people saw the news coverage, but it was just a few days ago, a committee at Yale that, in a much more honest way than anybody expected, said, we've got real problems that we have to lay at our own doorstep. We have to think, we have to
Mm,
do things differently. So I do think, I mean, I think it's possible that the system might change. I don't think the system is going away, and I think it needs to change. Um, but the other thing I want to say, and I always say this to kids, to college students, you can't wait for the grown-ups to get our act together. But at the same time, you have more freedom in the system than anyone else, more than the
yeah.
professors who are worrying about publishing and the university administrators who want to keep their donors happy and these poor high school teachers who really do have a vocation, but the parents are breathing down their necks. And the parents who have all these financial responsibilities. You, kid, you just have to be able to, take care of yourself. You have more freedom than any of the rest of us. The world is all before you, as Milton wrote. And you you are the last people who should feel constrained by this system. You have much more freedom than you think you do. Many, many, many more options than you've been told you do. And it takes courage. It takes self-belief. I think it helps if you have friends who think like you and you're supporting each other. But look at these successful adults in the community that you grew up in. They were once like you. They were uncertain. They didn't know how to do anything because they hadn't been out in the world. And yet they managed to make it all the way to this, seemingly impossible position of, stability and success and maybe even fulfillment. So if they could do it, you can do it.
William Deresiewicz, professor, author, and champion of meaningful education. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
For me as well. Thank you.
So I've been thinking, years ago, when I first read William Deresiewicz's book, Excellent Sheep, I was stunned. How could young people with so much promise, academic elites, athletic wonders, musical savants, and social masters, become so lost? The very proposition that these kids can do almost anything you ask, equipped with grit and determination, work ethic and talent, but are so dumbstruck when confronted with why they want to do it and who they want to be, was just crushing. It has become apparent, however, that we have learned to create the perfect machine, and it seems that it is our kids. When I was in medical school, I remember the siren song of attending physicians coaxing me into the arduous specialty of neurosurgery. Dreaming of the money, the accolades, and the strut that comes with such a profession, I nearly bit. But then I realized I don't want to be a neurosurgeon. This was sort of an epiphany. Now, perhaps I fooled myself that I could have even succeeded at such an imposing career, but the lesson I learned from that experience still rings true today. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. In reading Excellent Sheep, I was reminded how easy it is in life to let the how eclipse the why. Our kids know the recipe for success, the process of achievement, which includes hard work, goal setting, time management, and a winsome attitude. But what if they do all of this and end up in the wrong place? Welsh novelist Alan Rain, no stranger to blind alleys and dead ends, once warned, quote, "You may get to the very top of the ladder and then find it has not been leaning against the right wall," close quote. Deresiewicz reminds us that when we are young, we are wet clay, unformed and moldable. But when we are old, we harden. We just need to teach in a way that impresses upon our children the ethic of asking the hard questions. Who do I want to be? Why do I want to do this? How will this path open new vistas and close others? Is this, in fact, my calling? Discernment is less a lightning bolt and more often a painted portrait that becomes apparent with studiously applied brushstrokes. With time and attention, the image becomes clear. Our children are eager to please, and they aren't shy about work. But let us remember that their degrees aren't simply commodities, and their lives aren't simply meant to be useful. They're meant to be meaningful. To be sure, we want our kids to be successful, but may they be so with a sense of the saints. And one last thing, if you're applying to college or you have a child or grandchild applying to school, do not miss reading Excellent Sheep. But also be sure to read or watch the late great Professor Donald Kagan's swan song speech on the state of college education, captured in his 2013 farewell lecture at Yale University. The education of our children is important, but proper formation of their soul and sensibility matters even more. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Tod Worner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.